Hello, this is Claus Jensen presenting a very recent game from the still ongoing Dortmund tournament. Vladimir Kramnik has had an excellent first half of the tournament. He leads with 4.5 points out of 5, and it's not exactly poor opposition he's facing. Lequang, Ponomariev, Nakamura, Young Giri, and the local Meier. This is the second round game between Georg Meier playing white and Vladimir Kramnik with the black pieces. And the game starts d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, b6, the queen's engine. And g3, bishop a6 from Kramnik, b3, bishop b4 check, bishop d2, bishop e7, bishop g2, and with castle here, Kramnik chooses the sharpest move, leaving the diagonal open and inviting a discovered attack on the rook on a8. The most obvious try would be something like knight e5, but it could simply be met by either d5 or c6. So in the game, Georg Meier plays knight c3 instead. d5, c takes d5, e takes d5, castles. Rook e8 and rook c1, and normal developing moves from both sides. And now Kramnik decides that his only undeveloped minor piece, the knight on b8, is going to a6, because from a6 it supports the c5 break, and until this break is possible, the knight also defends c7. So the bishop has to go back to b7. Knight e5 and knight a6, and here we can see how it supports the c5 break and defends the c7 pawn. So we can say here that a knight on the rim is not always dim. Bishop f4, h6. Preparing to kick the bishop from f4, which could be necessary since the pressure on c7 could be annoying for Kramnik. And with knight b5, Meier is actually adding pressure on c7. In this position, the most logical move seems to be c5 here, which was actually played in Aronian Ivanchuk from 2006. And Aronian continued with knight c4, because the pawn on d5 is pinned, and with the idea of putting a knight on d6. The game continued bishop c6, bishop c to d6, rook f8, d takes, b takes, knight d4, and for the second time in only a few moves, Aronian tries to take advantage of a pinned pawn, but this time Chucky took the knight, c takes d4, rook takes c6, knight b4, knight b7, and queen e8, and the game was later drawn. And I don't know if Kramnik had this game in mind, but he chose bishop f8 instead. And this move has been played once before, 3 years ago in the game Onishuk Alexeyev, and white played knight c6 and tried to grab the pawn on a7, and perhaps Kramnik was hoping for Meier to do the same. But in the game, Meier instead played bishop h3. So this is the move that takes the game out of book. c5 came from Kramnik, a3, knight e4, rook c2, and now Kramnik plays g6. He possibly did so because he wanted to take away the f5 square from white's bishop, and of course also perhaps put his bishop on g7. But in view of white's next move, then an immediate g5 must have been better, because after g6, then Meier played queen c1, threatening on h6, and the king cannot go to h7 to defend the pawn, because the f7 pawn would then be hanging. So g5 is practically forced here, and this is why he could just as well have played g5 in the first place. Bishop e3, and with bishop g7, Kramnik threatens a capture on e4. Knight f3, slowly but surely, white's minor pieces are being driven back, and Kramnik is taking over some space. It seems logical to chase away also the knight on b5 in order to be able to develop the rook on a8 without risking to lose the pawn on a7. But Kramnik has other ideas. He could have played bishop c6, as I said. knight c3, queen e7, knight takes e4, d takes e4, knight d2, and then rook a d8. This would be a natural, logical development plan. But as I said, Kramnik had other ideas. He played queen e7 here, sorry. Rook d1, and then rook a to d8. Please take the a7 pawn if you wish. Perhaps inspired from this Onyshik Alexeyev game I spoke of before. And Meier takes the pawn on a7. And then knight d6. The knight is trapped in enemy territory, and white has to create an escape route on b5, so he plays a4. But now with a4, the b4 square is available to Kramnik, and this is the real price that Kramnik demanded for the pawn. And he takes his knight there immediately, not minding that he actually gives a second pawn now. D takes c5, b takes e5, and rook takes e5. And it's quite amazing how Kramnik has sacked 2 pawns for piece activity. That's not very Kramnik-like, but very refreshing to see. Knight a2, queen c2, knight b4, queen c1. I guess these moves were played to manage the clock. And Kramnik could of course have gone for a repetition here with knight a2, but instead he plays a very interesting move. He plays knight c4. Amazing, really. It takes some imagination to come up with a move like that. Of course, Meier takes the knight, and now Kramnik blocks the communication between the rook on c5 and its defender, the bishop on e3. He plays d4. And in a few moves, Kramnik has managed to complicate the game, and it's not easy to find all the right moves, especially not when you're in time trouble. And Kramnik is playing a high-risk game here. The position is also an excellent calculation exercise. So you could pause the video and answer these 2 questions. Question number 1. What happens if white captures the pawn with his bishop, if he plays bishop takes d4? And secondly, question number 2, what is the best move in the position? You could pause the video and try to answer these questions if you like. First, let's answer question number 1. What happens if bishop takes d4? Then comes queen takes e2, and the f3 knight is hanging, and white is in all kinds of trouble. And the answer to question number 2, what is the best move in the position? There are 2 moves that are almost equally strong. The best is probably rook takes d4, and then rook takes, and then knight takes d4. This is a strong continuation for white, because after queen takes c5, knight a b5, white has 3 pawns for the exchange, which should be more than enough to win the game. And also, instead of knight takes d4 here, bishop takes d4 could be played. Bishop takes, knight takes, queen takes e5, and knight a b5 again. So rook takes d5 is a strong move. Another strong move, and almost equally strong, is knight takes d4. Queen takes c5, and again knight a b5. So rook takes d5 or knight takes d5. But in the game, Georg Meier played bishop takes g5. Kramnik takes the rook on c5, and bishop takes d8. And again, you could try to pause the video, and this time try to find the strongest continuation for black. There are several possible moves in this position, but only one that is really stronger than the others. So let's have a look at some of the possibilities. One option could be to take the bishop on d8, but then knight b5 would simply leave black down a piece. Another option is to take the knight on a7, and then queen a3 is a strong move. Queen c5, and the position is unclear. Another possibility, rook takes e2, but then queen f4, defending the knight on f3, and white is better. So the strongest move in the position is d3, and this was indeed what Kramnik played in the game. Two white pieces were hanging, and still Kramnik added another threat to take on e2. And how should Meier react now? Well, the strongest move in the position, very hard to find in time trouble, is rook d2. And after d takes e2, knight e1, bishop d4, rook takes, queen takes. It's more or less an even game. But in the game, Meier played knight e1 immediately. Of course, hoping for a development like the one I just spoke of, like d takes e2, rook d7 would be very strong for Meier actually. Queen takes a7, queen f4, and all of a sudden, after bishop e7 here, it's end of story for Kramnik. But Kramnik played rook takes e2, and now there's a threat on f2, and the bishop on b7 is dominating the white king on the light squares, and all of a sudden the white king is in big danger. White is actually lost. Queen f4 is of course defending f2, but after this move I have one last exercise for you. Can you find Kramnik's next move? It's a very strong move, it's a decisive move, and it's actually the last move of the game. You could pause the video and try to find this move. The move that Kramnik played in this position was rook takes f2, and Meier resigned here. He saw that he would either be mated very quickly or lose his queen after, for example, queen takes f2, then bishop d4. And if, for example, knight f3, then rook takes f3, discover check, king g2, and then again a discover check, rook takes f4 check, knight has to go between, and then bishop takes c6 is actually checkmate. Another possibility was after rook takes f3 to play king h1, and then would follow rook f1 checkmate. So rook takes f2 was the decisive move in the game, and this game started out in true Kramnik style. He played a solid opening and accurately met all white's threats. Then he drove back white's pieces, and all of a sudden he exploded. Sacked 2 pawns and a knight. Pieces were hanging all over the board, and poor Meier, in beginning side note, didn't manage to find the right moves all the way. And just as quickly as the complications had commenced, the game ended. I don't think this game will go over in chess history as a classic, but to me it was really refreshing to see Kramnik play at a very high risk level. We all know the man is a genius, but we also know that he's normally quite boring. That's why many people call him Drawnik. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you on my blog at klausjensen.com. Bye bye for now.